The black CEO went undercover as an intern to save his company, but he didn't expect to fall in love. Welcome to True Soul Narratives, where every story carries a heartbeat: love, betrayal, forgiveness, and the courage to start again. If this story resonates with you, subscribe and leave a like. Now, let's return to the story. James sat in a cramped cubicle on the third floor, his hands gripping the edge of the cheap desk, watching through a glass conference room wall as his entire world fell apart. The meeting was supposed to be private, executive level only, but from where he sat, pretending to review spreadsheets he'd created years ago, he could see everything. The woman stood at the head of the table, her hands planted firmly on the polished surface, facing down a room full of men in expensive suits. Vanessa. He'd learned her name 2 weeks ago. Now he watched her fight for him with a passion that made his chest ache. "The CEO might be out of touch," Vanessa said, her voice carrying through the glass. "But firing half the staff isn't the answer. These are people with families, mortgages, One of the board members, Richard Blackwell, leaned back in his chair with the smugness of a man who'd already made up his mind. "James Crawford has lost control of this company. It's time for new leadership." James's jaw clenched. He wanted to storm in there, to defend himself, to remind them he'd built this company from nothing. But he couldn't. Not yet, because Vanessa was still speaking, and what she said next stopped his heart. "Companies are people, not profit margins," she said, her voice trembling with conviction. "Someone needs to remind him of that, and if you won't, I will." She was defending him, fighting for him, and she had no idea he was sitting 10 feet away, disguised in cheap khakis and a button-down shirt from Target, pretending to be an intern named Marcus. 2 weeks ago, James Crawford had gone undercover as an intern in his own company. Now the woman trying to save his job was the same woman making him question everything he thought he knew about leadership and love. But to understand how a CEO ended up hiding in a cubicle, you need to know where it all went wrong. James Crawford was 35 years old, and by most measures, a remarkable success story. He'd built Crawford Tech Solutions from a garage startup into a $100 million company in just 8 years. He was the first black CEO in his industry to reach this level of success, breaking barriers that had stood for decades. Magazine covers, speaking engagements, a Forbes profile that called him the future of tech leadership. He was driven, brilliant, relentless, and completely isolated at the top. It hadn't always been like this. When James started the company, he'd known every employee by name. He'd done Pizza Fridays where he'd sit with developers and designers, talking about their lives, their dreams, their kids. He'd built the company on a simple philosophy his father had taught him: take care of your people, and they'll take care of the business. But 2 years ago, his father died. Sudden heart attack, no warning, no goodbye. And something in James broke that he couldn't quite fix. He threw himself into work, into growth, into proving that his father's faith in him hadn't been misplaced. 12-hour days became 16-hour days. His corner office became a fortress. Employees became statistics. People became line items on a balance sheet. He told himself it was necessary. Scaling required sacrifice. Growth required distance. But deep down, he knew he'd lost something essential. He just didn't know how to get it back. The crisis hit on a Tuesday morning. The quarterly earnings report landed on his desk like a bomb. Revenue down 15%. Profit margins shrinking. Investors calling emergency meetings. The board of directors, men who'd backed him from the beginning, suddenly looking at him with doubt in their eyes. Then came the anonymous employee survey results. James had approved the survey months ago, thinking it would be positive, proof that his leadership was working. Instead, he got a folder full of brutal truths that cut deeper than any financial loss. CEO doesn't care about us anymore. Company has lost its soul. We're just numbers to him now. He forgot why he started this. James read every comment twice, his hands shaking, his throat tight. This wasn't supposed to happen. He'd built this company to create jobs, to make a difference, to prove that success didn't have to come at the cost of humanity. And somehow he'd become exactly what he'd always hated, a boss who didn't see his people. The board called an emergency meeting that same afternoon. They didn't waste time with pleasantries. Richard Blackwell, the lead investor, laid it out bluntly. We need to cut costs immediately. 50% staff reduction. It's the only way to stabilize the bleeding. James stared at them, stunned. 50%? That's half our people. It's half our overhead, another board member corrected. These are necessary measures. These are people, not line items, James said, his voice hard. I built this company to create jobs, not destroy them. Blackwell leaned forward, his expression cold. Then you built it wrong, because right now, sentiment doesn't pay the bills. Either you make the cuts, or we vote no confidence and bring in someone who will. You have 30 days. James left that meeting feeling like he'd been punched in the stomach. 30 days. Fix the company or lose it. And he had no idea how. That evening, he sat in his office long after everyone had gone home. The employee survey comments spread across his desk. Gerald Morrison, his COO and mentor, a man who'd been with him since the garage days, knocked and entered without waiting for permission. You look like hell, Gerald said, sitting across from him. I feel like it. Gerald picked up one of the survey printouts, read it, and set it down with a heavy sigh. You've lost touch with the ground floor, James, and I know. Do you? Gerald's voice was gentle but firm. When's the last time you talked to an employee who wasn't an executive? When's the last time you walked through the actual office instead of going straight to your corner suite? James opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. He couldn't remember. You used to know everyone's name, Gerald continued. Their kids' names, their dreams. What happened to that guy? He got busy, James said bitterly. He got successful. He got lost. Gerald leaned forward. You want to save this company? Stop managing it from the top. Get down in the trenches. See what's really happening. I can't just... James trailed off, an idea forming. Insane, impossible. Maybe brilliant. What if I went undercover? Gerald blinked. What? Work as an intern. Use my middle name. See the company through their eyes. Find out what's really broken. That's crazy. It's desperate, James corrected, but I'm out of options. 30 days, Gerald. I find out what's broken and fix it, or I lose everything I built. Gerald studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. Then you better make it count. 1 week later, James Crawford shaved his beard, put on a pair of non-prescription glasses, and applied for an internship at his own company using his middle name, Marcus. He'd barely been in the main office in 2 years, always working from the executive floor or remotely. HR didn't recognize him. His application was accepted. His first day was surreal. He walked through the main entrance like any other employee, badge scanning at security, elevator packed with people who'd once worked for him and didn't know who he was. He felt ridiculous, out of place, terrified someone would recognize him. But no one did. He was assigned to the product development team, 3rd floor, cubicle 3B. His supervisor would be meeting him at 9 a.m. James sat at the tiny desk, surrounded by gray walls and the hum of fluorescent lights, and wondered what the hell he'd gotten himself into. Then she walked in, Vanessa Mitchell, 29 according to her employee file, though James had never looked at it before today. Senior product manager, 8 years with the company. In person, she was striking, not in a polished executive way, but in a way that suggested she was too busy actually working to worry about appearances. Natural hair pulled back, minimal makeup, bright eyes that missed nothing. You must be Marcus, she said, extending her hand with a warm smile. Welcome to the team. I'm Vanessa. James shook her hand, his heart pounding irrationally. Thank you. Happy to be here. We need fresh perspectives, she said, already moving, gesturing for him to follow. Come on, I'll show you around and introduce you to everyone. As Vanessa walked him through the department, James saw something he hadn't seen in years. She knew everyone, not just their names, but their lives. She asked Tom about his daughter's soccer game, congratulated Lisa on her anniversary, checked in with David about his mother's surgery. She remembered. She cared. And everyone responded to her with genuine affection. This was what he used to be, before the corner office, before the isolation. Vanessa was everything James had lost, reflected back at him like a mirror to his past. During lunch, they sat in the break room, and Vanessa opened up about the company in a way no executive ever had with him. "We used to matter," she said, staring into her coffee. "This place, it used to feel like we were building something important. Now it just feels like we're chasing numbers." James's throat tightened. "What changed?" "The CEO," Vanessa said simply. "James Crawford. He started this company with this vision that technology could change lives, that we could build a company that valued people. But somewhere along the way, he forgot. He forgot why he started. He forgot that we're not just employees, we're human beings." She looked at James, at Marcus, with an intensity that made him want to confess everything. Someone needs to remind him before it's too late. James felt the accusation like a physical blow. She was right. About all of it. He had forgotten. And sitting here, disguised as an intern, watching this woman fight for the soul of his company, he realized something terrifying. He was falling for her, and she didn't even know his real name. If this story already has your heart racing, subscribe to True Soul Narratives, because what happens next will change everything. Have you ever lost sight of who you were while chasing success? Tell us in the comments below. Over the next 2 weeks, James saw everything, and what he saw broke him. He watched managers walk past employees trying to voice concerns, dismissing them with barely concealed impatience. He sat through team meetings where brilliant ideas were shut down with, "That's not a priority right now," by executives who'd never asked what the priorities should be. He worked on computers so outdated they froze 3 times an hour. And when he asked about upgrades, someone laughed bitterly and said, "We've been asking for 2 years. Apparently we're not worth the investment." But the worst part, the part that kept James awake at night, was the people. Tom, who worked a second job driving for a rideshare service because his salary barely covered his mortgage. Lisa, who brought leftovers for lunch every single day because she was saving for her son's college fund. David, whose mother needed surgery and was rationing his own medications to help pay for it. These were his employees, his responsibility, and he'd had no idea. One afternoon, James was in the bathroom when he heard someone crying in one of the stalls. Soft, muffled ohs that someone was trying desperately to hide. He almost left, but something made him wait. When the door opened, a young woman emerged, maybe 27, eyes red and swollen. Sarah. He'd met her the first week, a single mother who worked in accounting. "Are you okay?" James asked before he could stop himself. Sarah wiped her face quickly, embarrassed. "I'm fine. Just a rough day." But she wasn't fine. Later, James overheard her on the phone during her break, her voice strained as she talked to a pharmacy. Her daughter needed medicine for her asthma, but Sarah's insurance had denied the claim. The out-of-pocket cost was $400, money she didn't have. James sat in his cubicle listening to Sarah beg the pharmacist for a payment plan and felt something crack inside his chest. This was his company. He'd built this. And somewhere along the way, he'd built a place where a mother couldn't afford to keep her daughter breathing. His relationship with Vanessa had become the only bright spot in those dark 2 weeks. They worked together daily, and she mentored him with a patience and passion that reminded him why he'd loved building this company in the first place. Coffee breaks became conversations that stretched long past the allotted 15 minutes. They talked about life, dreams, philosophy, the kind of deep discussions James hadn't had in years. Vanessa told him her story one afternoon, sitting on the building's back steps during lunch. She'd grown up poor scholarship kid who'd fought for every opportunity. "I was the first in my family to get a degree," she said, her voice quiet with old pain and pride. "This job, it meant everything to me. Proof that I could make it, that I belonged in rooms where people like me don't usually get invited." She looked out at the parking lot, her expression distant. "But lately I don't recognize this place anymore. It's like the heart got ripped out and replaced with a calculator." James wanted to tell her everything, wanted to confess who he was, what he was trying to do, but he couldn't, not yet, because once he did, this would end, and he wasn't ready for it to end. The project consumed most of their time. Vanessa's team was developing a new product, something revolutionary that could genuinely change the industry and save the company. James had seen the specs, reviewed the projections as Marcus, and recognized immediately that this was exactly what Crawford Tech needed. It was innovative, practical, profitable, perfect. But the executives kept blocking it. Every meeting, every pitch, met with the same response. Not enough projected short-term profit, too risky, not aligned with current priorities. James watched Vanessa fight for it, meeting after meeting, her passion never dimming even as she was shot down repeatedly. One evening, after another rejection, she sat at her desk staring at nothing, her jaw tight with frustration. "Why do you keep trying?" James asked softly. "They're never going to approve it." Vanessa looked at him, and he saw fire in her eyes. "Because giving up means they win, means the company I loved is really dead, and I'm not ready to accept that. Not yet." James saw himself in that moment, the younger version, the one who'd believed companies could be both profitable and humane, the one his father had raised, and he realized Vanessa was fighting for that version of him, the version he'd lost. One night they stayed late working on a presentation, one last desperate pitch to the board. The office was empty, quiet except for the hum of computers and the distant sound of traffic outside. Vanessa ordered pizza, the cheap kind from the place down the street, and they ate at her desk, surrounded by charts and projections. "Can I tell you something?" Vanessa said, setting down her slice. "My father died when I was 12. Cancer. Fast and brutal." James's breath caught. "I'm sorry. He was a janitor or worked 3 jobs to keep us fed. But he used to tell me every single night before bed, 'Build something that matters, Nessa. Not just something that makes money. Build something that matters.'" James froze. Those words. His father had said the exact same thing, the exact same words. He stared at Vanessa, this woman who was basically a stranger but felt like she understood him better than anyone had in years. "Marcus?" Vanessa's voice pulled him back. She was looking at him with concern and curiosity. "What about you? Why are you really here? And don't give me that gaining experience line. Nobody takes an internship at 25 unless there's a story." James's throat tightened. He was 35, not 25, but she didn't know that. He almost told her, almost confessed everything. Who he was, why he was there, how much she'd already changed him. But fear held his tongue. Fear that once she knew she'd hate him. Fear that this fragile connection would shatter. "Just needed a fresh start," he said, the lie tasting bitter. "Sometimes you have to start over to figure out who you really are." Vanessa studied him, and James had the unsettling feeling she saw right through him. But she didn't push. She just nodded and went back to work. They were becoming something. James didn't know what to call it. Friends, certainly. But there was more. Lingering glances across the office, accidental touches when they reached for the same document, the way his heart raced when she laughed at something he said. The chemistry was undeniable, crackling between them like electricity. James knew he was crossing a line, knew this was dangerous, unethical, a dozen kinds of wrong. But for the first time in 2 years since his father died, he felt alive, felt like himself. The real version, not the hollow CEO in the corner office. One Friday evening, Vanessa invited him to the employee happy hour at a bar down the street. "Come on, Marcus, you need to see the real culture of this place." James went, nervous but curious. The bar was crowded with Crawford Tech employees, loosened ties and rolled up sleeves, the exhaustion of the work week melting into laughter and drinks. And once the alcohol started flowing, so did the opinions. "Crawford doesn't care about us anymore," someone said, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "He's forgotten where he came from." "Used to be different," an older developer added. "Remember the pizza Fridays, when he'd actually come down and talk to us? Knew everyone's name?" "That guy's gone," someone else said. "Now he's just another rich CEO who sees us as expenses to cut." James sat there, his beer untouched, listening to them dissect him, listening to them mourn who he used to be. And he realized something that hit him like a revelation. They didn't hate him. They missed him. They missed the leader he'd been before grief and ambition had turned him into someone unrecognizable. Vanessa caught his eye from across the table and offered a small, sad smile, like she knew these words were hurting him somehow. The breaking point came on Monday morning. James arrived at his cubicle to find the office in chaos. People huddled in groups, whispering urgently, and at the center of it all was Sarah, the single mother, bobbing at her desk with a termination letter in her hand. Part of the efficiency cuts, someone explained bitterly, approved by the executives last week. 12 people let go. Sarah's one of them. James felt his blood run cold. This was what the board had demanded, the cuts he'd been trying to avoid, and his own executives had gone behind his back and started implementing them. Vanessa was at Sarah's desk, arms around her, fury radiating from every line of her body. She grabbed her laptop, typed furiously for several minutes, then hit send with enough force to make people nearby flinch. James watched from his cubicle as Vanessa stood, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know he was watching. Didn't know he could see her whisper to herself, "I don't know if he'll even read it, but I had to try." James pulled out his phone, opened his CEO email account, the one only executives had access to, and there it was. New message from Vanessa Mitchell. Subject line, "Please read this before it's too late." He opened it. "Mr. Crawford, I know you don't know me. I'm just another employee whose name you've probably never learned. But I'm writing to you about Sarah Chen, who received a termination notice today. She's a single mother. She works harder than anyone I know. Her daughter has asthma, and she's been struggling to afford medication. And you're firing her. If you let this happen, if you fire Sarah and the 11 others on that list, you prove everything everyone says about you is true, that you've forgotten what this company was supposed to be, that you've forgotten that we're people, not line items. Please, remember why you started this company. Remember who you wanted to be. It's not too late." Vanessa Mitchell, someone who still believes in what Crawford Tech used to stand for. James read it 3 times, his vision blurring with tears he couldn't shed. Not here, not as Marcus. She'd written it thinking he'd never read it, hoping against hope that maybe, somehow, it would reach him. And here he sat, 10 feet away, reading every word, feeling every ounce of her pain, her hope, her desperate faith that the man who'd built this company still existed somewhere. He was reading it, right now, and he knew exactly what he had to do, even if it meant losing her forever. That night, James made the call. Emergency board meeting, 7 a.m. the next morning, mandatory attendance. He arrived early, dressed in his CEO clothes, so he was for the first time in 2 weeks. The suit felt foreign now, too stiff, too formal. Like armor he didn't want to wear anymore. But he needed it. Needed every bit of authority he could muster for what he was about to do. The board filed in at 7:02, confused and irritated at the early summons. Richard Blackwell took his seat with a sigh. "This better be important, Crawford." "It is," James said, standing at the head of the table. "I'm canceling the layoffs, all of them, effective immediately, especially Sarah Chen." The room erupted. "You can't be serious," Blackwell said, half rising from his chair. "We gave you 30 days to fix this, and you're making it worse?" "You're being emotional," another board member added. "This is business, James, not charity." "No," James said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "This is people, and I forgot that. I forgot that every number on those spreadsheets is someone's livelihood, someone's family, someone's life." He looked around the table, meeting each of their eyes. "For the past 2 weeks, I've been working undercover as an intern in my own company. I've seen what we've become, what I've let us become. Managers who don't listen. Equipment so outdated people can barely do their jobs. Employees working second jobs just to survive. And brilliant ideas being ignored because we're too focused on short-term profit to see the long-term vision." Blackwell stared at him. "You went undercover?" "I needed to see the truth, and I found it." James pulled out his laptop, projecting Vanessa's email onto the screen. "This is from one of our senior product managers. She wrote directly to me, begging me to remember why I started this company." To remember that we're people, not line items. He let them read it, watch their faces shift from annoyance to something else. Discomfort. Maybe shame. I built Crawford Tech to matter, James said quietly, to prove that companies could be profitable and humane. We've lost our way. I've lost my way. But I know how to fix it. He pulled up Vanessa's product proposal. This is our salvation. Revolutionary technology, market ready, everything we need. And we've been blocking it because the executives decided it wasn't a priority. Blackwell studied the projections, his expression unreadable. This is the Mitchell project? Yes, and it's brilliant. I want a full presentation to this board. Tomorrow. If you don't approve it after seeing what it can do, I'll resign, but I won't fire those 12 people. I won't become the kind of CEO who forgets why he started. The room was silent. Then Blackwell leaned back, a small smile playing at his lips. One presentation. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. But Crawford, if this fails, we're done protecting you. Understood. The next day, Vanessa's team assembled in the main conference room at 1:45 p.m. James watched them set up through the glass wall, his heart pounding. Vanessa moved with nervous energy, checking the slides, adjusting the projector, whispering last-minute encouragements to her team. She didn't know he'd be there. Didn't know Marcus, the intern she'd mentored, was actually the CEO she'd been defending. The board filed in at 2 p.m. James entered last, taking his seat at the head of the table. Clean-shaven now, beard grown back, wearing his CEO uniform. He looked different than he had as Marcus. He knew that, counted on it. Vanessa started the presentation, her voice strong and confident despite the high stakes. She was brilliant, articulate, making a case so compelling that even Blackwell was leaning forward with interest. James watched her, pride and longing warring in his chest. Midway through, Vanessa turned to advance the slide and her eyes swept across the board, past Blackwell, past the other members, and then they landed on James. She froze. Her hand, raised to point at the projection, stopped midair. The color drained from her face. James saw the exact moment recognition crashed over her, saw her mind racing, connecting the dots. The beard, the glasses, Marcus. Marcus? She whispered, the word barely audible. The room went silent. Every head turned toward James. He stood slowly, his heart breaking at the betrayal and confusion in her eyes. It's James, he said gently. James Crawford. And you should finish your presentation. Vanessa stared at him, her body rigid with shock. Then somehow she found her voice, turned back to the board, and finished. Her voice shook slightly, but she powered through, delivering every point with devastating precision. When she was done, Blackwell nodded. Approved. Greenlit as of today. Congratulations, Ms. Mitchell. But Vanessa didn't look happy. She looked shattered. The moment the board adjourned, Vanessa stormed out of the conference room. James followed, his security team starting to move with him until he waved them off. She made it all the way to his office before turning on him. You lied to me, Vanessa said, her voice trembling with fury. To everyone. You stood there, in that cubicle, pretending to be someone you weren't. I needed to see the truth, James said, closing the door behind them. And you showed it to me. By manipulating me? Her voice rose. By pretending to be some intern who cared about people when you were the CEO the whole time? Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? I wasn't pretending, James said urgently. Not about the important things. Everything I said, everything I felt that was real. Vanessa laughed bitterly, tears streaming down her face now. How can I believe that? How can I believe anything you said when you were lying about who you were? Because Marcus is who I used to be, James said, stepping closer. Who I wanted to be again. You helped me remember that person, Vanessa. You reminded me why I started this company. Why it mattered. That's real, Tite. That's the truth. I trusted you, Vanessa said, her voice breaking completely. The real you. I told you things I don't tell anyone. And the whole time you were him. The CEO I was defending. The man I thought had forgotten everything. And you let me believe you were someone else. I know, James whispered. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Vanessa wiped her face, straightening her shoulders. I can't do this. I won't be your project, James, your redemption arc. I'm not here to fix you or teach you how to be human again. That's your job, not mine. She walked to the door, her hand on the handle. James wanted to stop her, to say something that would make her stay. But what could he say? She was right. About all of it. For what it's worth, James said quietly, you already did. Fix me, or at least remind me I could fix myself. And I'll spend the rest of my life grateful for that, even if you never speak to me again. Vanessa paused, her back still to him. Then she opened the door and left without looking back. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. James implemented everything. Raises across the board, new equipment, better benefits, flexible schedules for parents, mental health support. He approved Vanessa's product and gave her team the resources they needed. He started doing Pizza Fridays again, sitting with employees, learning their names, their stories. The company began to turn around. Slowly, then faster. Morale improved. Productivity soared. The board backed off, satisfied that James had found his footing again. Everything he'd gone undercover to fix was being fixed. Everything except the one thing that mattered most. Vanessa transferred to a different department, took a role that meant she'd never have to interact with James directly. She avoided him in hallways, left meetings early if he entered, made it clear in every possible way that whatever had existed between Marcus and Vanessa was dead. James threw himself into work, into being the CEO his employees needed. But at night, alone in his corner office, he felt hollow, empty. He'd saved the company. But what had he lost in the process? Gerald found him there one evening, staring out at the city lights. You saved the company, Gerald said, sitting in the chair across from the desk. Employees are happy, revenue's up, board's satisfied. You did it, James. Yeah, James said flatly. Gerald studied him. But you lost her. James didn't respond, didn't need to. So what now? Gerald asked. You saved the company, but did you lose yourself again? Different version, same isolation? James leaned back in his chair, exhausted. I don't know, Gerald. I don't know how to fix this one. Maybe, Gerald said gently. You can't fix it. Maybe you just have to live with it. The consequence of the choice you made. James nodded slowly. Maybe Gerald was right. Maybe some things, once broken, couldn't be repaired. Maybe Vanessa would never forgive him. And maybe he didn't deserve her forgiveness anyway. But that didn't stop him from missing her, from replaying every conversation they'd had as Marcus, from wishing he could go back and do it differently, from knowing that in trying to save his company, he'd found something far more valuable and lost it just as quickly. 3 weeks passed. 3 weeks of James working harder than he'd ever worked, not from his corner office, but from the floors below. 3 weeks of changes, improvements, watching his company come back to life. 3 weeks of seeing Vanessa in meetings, in hallways, in the cafeteria, and having her look right through him like he was invisible. It was killing him. On a Thursday afternoon, James called it a company-wide meeting. Mandatory attendance. The main auditorium filled with employees, confused murmurs rippling through the crowd. These meetings were rare, usually reserved for major announcements, good or bad. James stood at the podium looking out at hundreds of faces, his people, and for the first time in years, he actually saw them. 3 weeks ago, James began, his voice carrying through the speakers, I made some major changes to this company. Raises, new equipment, better benefits, flexible schedules. And I want you to know, those changes didn't come from me sitting in my office looking at spreadsheets. The room quieted, everyone leaning forward slightly. They came from you, from listening to what you actually needed instead of assuming I knew best. From remembering that this company is nothing without the people who show up every day and pour their hearts into it. He paused, his throat tight. I lost sight of that. I got so focused on growth and profit that I forgot why I started Crawford Tech in the first place. To build something that mattered. To create jobs, yes, but more than that. To create a place where people felt valued. Scattered applause started, then grew. James held up his hand. But I didn't figure this out on my own. I owe someone an apology. A big one. He scanned the crowd until he found her. Third row, arms crossed, expression guarded. Vanessa Mitchell, could you come up here, please? Vanessa's eyes went wide. She shook her head slightly, but people around her were already encouraging her, patting her shoulder. Reluctantly, she stood and made her way to the stage, her face a mixture of confusion and wariness. James waited until she was beside him before continuing. Vanessa Mitchell showed me something I'd forgotten. That leadership isn't about being on top, removed and isolated. It's about being in the trenches with your people, understanding their struggles, listening to their ideas, remembering that every decision you make affects real lives. He turned to look at her directly now, speaking to her as much as to the room. I went undercover 3 weeks ago because I was lost. I'd built this company, achieved everything I thought I wanted, and realized I had no idea who I was anymore. And Vanessa, whether she knew it or not, helped me find my way back. Not as a CEO, as a person. Vanessa's eyes glistened with unshed tears. The anger was still there, but something else too. Something softer. So thank you, James said, for reminding me what matters, for fighting for this company when I'd given up fighting for it myself, for believing in the version of me I'd forgotten existed. The applause was thunderous now, employees standing, cheering. But James only saw Vanessa, saw the tear slip down her cheek, saw her lips form the words, "thank you," even though he couldn't hear it over the noise. The meeting ended, and James made his way through the crowd of employees wanting to shake his hand, to thank him, to tell him they'd noticed the changes. He smiled, nodded, but his eyes kept tracking Vanessa as she slipped toward the exit. He caught up with her in the empty hallway outside her office. "Vanessa, wait." She stopped, her back to him. That was quite a speech. "I meant every word." He moved closer, close enough to see her shoulders tense. "But I need to say more, privately." Vanessa turned, her arms wrapped around herself like armor. "I'm listening." "I'm sorry," James said, the words inadequate but necessary. "Not for going undercover, that needed to happen, but for lying about who I was, for letting you trust Marcus without telling you he was me." "Everything you told me," Vanessa said, her voice shaking, "about needing a fresh start, about figuring out who you are, was that all a lie?" "No," James said urgently. "Everything I felt was real. Everything I said was true. When you asked why I was really there, I should have been honest. The truth? I was trying to save my company. I was desperate and lost and running out of time." He took a breath. "But you saved me instead. You reminded me who I wanted to be, who my father raised me to be. And yes, I was dishonest about my name, my position, but I was completely honest about everything else, about how much I admired you, about how your passion inspired me, about how talking to you made me feel alive for the first time in years." Vanessa's walls cracked, her face softening. "I was so angry. For weeks, I've been so angry at you. You had every right to be. But I also," she paused, swallowing hard, "I missed you. Marcus, James, whoever you are. I missed those conversations, the way you listened, the way you cared. I miss my friend." "I'm still him," James said softly. "Marcus was just me, without the title, without the armor, the real me." "So who are you, Benita?" Vanessa asked. "Really?" James smiled sadly. "I'm just a guy who forgot what mattered until you reminded him. I'm someone who built something important and almost destroyed it through neglect. I'm a person who's still learning that success means nothing if you achieve it alone." They stood close now, the tension between them electric, charged with everything unsaid. Vanessa's eyes searched his face, looking for lies, for manipulation, finding only honesty. "So what now?" Vanessa asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Now," James said, "I'd like to take you to dinner. As myself, no disguises. No lies, no games, just James, if you're willing to give me a chance to do this right." Vanessa studied him for a long moment, then slowly a smile broke across her face. "I'd like that." James felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been tight for weeks. Yeah? Yeah, but James? Vanessa stepped closer, looking up at him. No more secrets. No more hiding. If we do this, we do it honestly. Deal, James whispered. Vanessa reached up, her hand cupping his face, and kissed him. Soft at first, tentative, like she was testing whether this was real. Then deeper, more certain. James pulled her close, and for the first time since his father died, he felt whole, complete, home. When they pulled apart, both breathless, Vanessa laughed. For the record, I liked Marcus, but I think I might like James even more. Good, James said, resting his forehead against hers. Because he's not going anywhere. He learned his lesson about disappearing. 6 months later, James stood in the main office watching employees move through their day with energy and purpose. The changes had stuck. The company was thriving, profitable, and humane. Everything he dreamed it could be. Vanessa walked up beside him carrying 2 coffees. She handed him one and they stood together, surveying the space they'd both fought to save. Your 3 o'clock is in 10 minutes, Vanessa said. She'd been promoted to VP of Product Development, a title she'd earned through brilliance and dedication. Our 3 o'clock, James corrected, taking her hand. They were partners now, in business and in life. The relationship had raised eyebrows initially, but when people saw how they worked together, how they challenged and supported each other, the whispers faded. An employee passed by, greeting them both warmly. Then another, and another. Not with fear or forced politeness, but genuine warmth, because James was back on the floor. Marcus had reminded him how. Thank you, James said quietly, for saving my company. Vanessa smiled, squeezing his hand. You saved it. I just reminded you how. No, James said, pulling her close and kissing her temple. You saved me. The company was just a bonus. They walked toward the conference room together, ready to face whatever came next. Because James had learned something in that cubicle, pretending to be someone else. He'd learned that success without humanity was just emptiness with a better view. That profit margins meant nothing if you sacrificed your soul to achieve them. That the people you work with, the people you love, the people who challenge you to be better, those were the only metrics that really mattered. And he'd learned that sometimes you have to lose yourself completely to find what you were looking for all along. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves to find what really matters. James Crawford had everything, success, money, respect, but he'd lost the one thing that made it all worthwhile. His humanity, his connection to the people who'd helped him build his dream. He had to become someone else, hide in a cubicle, work as an intern in his own company to remember who he was. Because success means nothing if you forget why you started. If you lose sight of the people who got you there. If you sacrifice your values on the altar of growth and profit. James almost lost everything trying to have it all. And it took a passionate woman with fire in her eyes and his father's words on her lips to show him the way back. Have you ever lost sight of what really mattered while chasing success? Have you forgotten who you were in pursuit of what you wanted to become? Share your story in the comments below. We all lose our way sometimes. The question is whether we find the courage to go back and remember. If this story reminded you that people matter more than profit, that leadership is about service, not status, that real success is measured in lives changed, not dollars earned, subscribe to True Soul Narratives. We tell stories that remind you what it means to be human, that remind you that behind every title, every achievement, every obstacle, there's a person trying to find their way home. Hit that subscribe button and join our family. Until next time, remember this. The most important work you'll ever do is the work of staying connected to who you really are. Don't let success make you forget. Don't let ambition steal your soul. And when you do lose your way, have the courage to go back to the beginning and start again. Because the best leaders aren't the ones at the top. They're the ones willing to go back to the bottom to remember why they climbed in the first place.